going to, but you, by all means, keep eating. One of the challenges of having a big conference like this in a big university like this is you forget there are students actually in the building. So that holds up the elevators, it holds up people moving around, so we have to take that into account when we do some of our movement planning. But we'll be going from this room back down to the moot court. And the elevators on both sides of the corridor, so that might speed things up a bit. But so we're about 15 minutes behind schedule, which is not too bad. But what I want to do for the lunch, we have about an hour. We have actually about a half hour, 40 minutes left in our lunch period. But we talked a little bit about, especially with the last session, about what's like the transition out of prison. And what are some of the human costs of it, what are the challenges and everything else, which is part of the whole challenge, really, of reimagining the system. Tomorrow we'll be going really deeply into the whole system of whole community supervision system, and just as there are provocative challenges and ideas about ending and abolishing the prison system, there are also challenges and ideas for abolishing community supervision altogether and reinventing it. But what I want to do right now is, some of you have already met Jeremiah Bourgeois last night, and he's asked some really great questions today. But Jeremiah is, I would say, a success story in some ways. He spent an astonishing 27 years in prison in Washington State for a murder he committed at 14. And for the last 3 years, he's been a columnist for the Crime Report, one of our most really provocative and I would even say brilliant columnists. Some of the ideas he's been talking about, mainly his description of the system as he saw it from the inside, what it meant to him, and it goes in many ways against the grain. Some of the things you'd expect him to say, he didn't say. Some of the things that he does say are really sort of ring your bells a little bit. And what I really want to, I don't want to talk so much about what's inside the system, but move a little bit towards the transition out of it. And both Jody and Albert took us a little bit into that area about, prison actually being a comfort zone in some ways, in terms of getting it back into the real world again. But when Jeremiah and I were talking a little bit last night, one of the things that struck me that he said was that you never really release yourself from the trauma of being in prison. Now, I mean, Jeremiah's been in for 27 years. It doesn't necessarily mean he's got 27 years of trauma ahead of him, but he's had, you get flashes. And I want to, maybe start by talking a little bit about that, about what you mean by that. What's you came out in October, so you're still a newbie. You've been inside a cloistered, tough environment for nearly 3 decades. You're now out in the real world. What does it feel like? I mean, what does it mean? I mean, your sentence was almost biblical, I would say, if not Russian, like a part of the Gulag archipelago. What does it feel like to come out on the first day and then the week after?
What's interesting is that the joy and the sense of, wow, I'm here, did not really come. And it's shocking to a lot of people that I talk to who are still confined, because you get this idea in your head that if only I were free, especially doing a life sentence. Most of my friends were doing life. And if only I got out there, oh, that would be so amazing. And I'm here, and it doesn't feel amazing. I would never have dreamed that I would be on a plane to New York and be speaking to a group of people like this. And the sense of wow is not there. And I've only been able to, I think what it is in order to do something seemingly extraordinary in prison, in that environment, you have to learn to disassociate. I could not let what was happening around me affect what I was trying to do or what my vision was. But in doing that, in order not to feel pain, you're not going to feel pleasure either. And so I think I did that for so many years that I'm just not feeling the wonders of actually being here. And it's really difficult trying to convey to people you're happy to see them, or with my fiance here, I love you and I care about you, when it's so hard to feel what I should be feeling.
We should actually recognize, as you mentioned, we should recognize Jeremiah's fiance, Amy Moole, who's really, we don't often think about the people waiting outside. And Amy was outside waiting for Jeremiah to come out for 14 years. 13 years.
Technically 7.
Technically 7, but you were out there for, and that's almost as much of a type of confinement, I would say, as being inside. And we'll get to that maybe in a little bit of our conversation. But do you think you'll ever get to WOW?
I don't know. I haven't had the opportunity to meet that many guys as of yet who have been through a similar experience and have been out for a significant amount of time, and they're able to finally feel that. But on the other hand, there's such a small cohort of prisoners who actually were confined as children, and the extent to which somebody's experience was who had a life sentence and they came in as an adult, and what it's like for them re-entering, as opposed to what it is for somebody who was a child who thought he was going to die in prison and now he's free. I just don't know how many of those other experiences and narratives are translatable to my particular circumstances.
Let's talk about that a bit. I mean, you had a life, obviously, up until 13 or 14, but then everything changed. I mean, you basically ended that normal life at the age of 14, 1992, and it's like being in a time machine, as I would, if I can even imagine it. How do you cope with that? I mean, when you come out, what are the things that strike first? What's the most difficult part of trying to get back? I mean, you're about to take the LSATs. Saturday.
Yeah.
Incredible. And you've done law journals from inside prison. You've written for us. You've done a lot of things that are remarkable, even for someone who'd be outside. But there's still that nagging, that albatross on your shoulder about being inside in this one environment. For a kid, take us through that a little bit about what it felt like, that all you would ever know might be the bars in your prison cell.
So as a kid and as emerging adult, before about age 25, I mean, the focus is, for me and for most of the other kids who were doing that amount of time, is survival. And part of survival for me and a lot of others is to ensure that everyone that I have to deal with in that environment recognizes that I'm not a victim or a potential victim. And in a place like that, typically correctional systems, if based upon the nature of your crime and your time structure, when you initially come to the Department of Corrections, you're going to go to a closed custody or high security facility. And in that environment, usually the disciplinary, prison discipline, the level of violence, it's higher than anywhere else. And so you're dealing with people who, if you allow yourself to be victimized, there's plenty of people there that will happily make a victim out of you. And in order to ensure that people know, basically, I'm not the one to be playing with, you make sure you make examples if any situation arises where the world will realize he's not the one. And it's strange, because when situations would happen where I knew, just based upon the prison code and ethos, that this is a situation that violence is necessary, it was almost as if I was watching myself in a movie, because I knew what role I had to play in the script, even while at the same time I'm acting out the violence. And so it was It was strategic and thought out in a way that really surprised and shocked my mother when she realized how much forethought actually went into my violent incidents in prison, because she thought it was just spontaneous. He can't control himself. But really, I had to explain, no, this was a rational response in this environment. I don't want to be preyed upon sexually. I don't want to be extorted. And if I have to hit this man upside the head with a weight while he's playing pinochle, because I know he's plotting to go in my cell and rape me, I'm going to do that. And it's a very cold and brutal place where even years into my confinement, when I'm writing for TCR, I still had to think like that. I still had to weigh, is this a situation where I'm going to have to respond in a way that is going to make me look like an animal, like I'm out of control, and that he shouldn't be released, when the reality is that is an abnormal environment, and nothing about your responses in there are translatable out here in many ways.
So these aren't the skills that are necessarily going to help you out here. Trying to get rid of them must be just as hard as learning new skills. Or maybe they are.
You know, when I speak about it being translatable, I don't know if it's that hard, because when you think about the amount of thought you have to go through to measure, is this a moment when I need to react violently? I mean, the same day I was released from prison, I went to a place called Azteca Restaurant, me and Amy, celebrating. I still had the sweatsuit that they give you, that they release you in. I'm still wearing it. And last time I'd been there, I was a child, and when it's somebody's birthday, they come out with all kinds of instruments and start singing Happy Birthday in Spanish. And I heard it and got so excited, I told her, wait, I'll be back. And I found the table that they were celebrating at, and I asked whose birthday it was, and they told me. And I said, let me buy your drinks. So I went up. They said, we already rang the bill. I said, don't worry, I got it taken care of. So I go up and I say, hey, I'm going to pay for those drinks over there. And the guy looked at me and he fiddled around on the cash register and he told me $100. And I had been in prison long enough to know something's not right. But I second-guessed myself for a moment, because I'm like, maybe he got confused with the tab, maybe. I'm trying to make a million excuses as to why I was told $100 even. But I gave him $100. And I remember the look of this quick flash of shock that kind of confirmed in my mind, something's not right here. But I just got out. I don't want to ruin this day and this moment. So I sat down and I tried to finish eating, and Amy knew something was wrong with me. But when we left, I got in the car and I saw the group who I'd bought the drinks for, and I couldn't help myself. So I got out the car and she was like, baby, what's going on? I said, no, hold on a minute. I'm all right. Don't worry. I'm all right. Trust me. And I asked them, hey, how much was your tab? And they said, for the beer, we just had a pitcher. It's like $12. And I said, you know, I think there was a mistake made with the tab. I was charged $100. And they said, our whole bill only cost $70. I said, would you be willing to go inside with me and explain that there might have been a mix-up? And, you know, I realize you're trying to do things, but I'll give you half. And the guy, he was a young guy, he laughed. He said, man, I was going to the strip club. I'll take $50. And so we went inside and I got the manager and I explained, hey, I went to pay for their drinks. I think there was a mix-up. I was charged $100. Could you look into this? I guess their bill was only $70-something total. And he went to the side room where it all happened, and I saw the guy wiping tables, and he looked up and did a double take when he saw me with the people. And about 7, 8 minutes later, the manager comes with a billfold. I don't even know this is what you put like the check and everything in. I've never done any of this. And he says, yeah, you left it, he had it right there on the table for you. And I open it up, and there's a receipt, and there's about $80 in there. And I said, thank you, man. I know it's been a big rush, and people can get mixed up. And shook his hand and walked out. And the group that I had bought the drinks for knew that they had just saw me get defrauded. And they said, man, wow, that is so strange. And I said, no, you know what's stranger? I just got out of prison less than 12 hours ago after serving over 27 years. And I was so happy to be out and see you celebrating that I wanted to buy you some drinks. And I got defrauded. And it's so strange that people out here think that it's the people inside that can't be trusted and that are unworthy. And a lot of the guys I left in there are more honorable than people that I'm meeting out here right now. And I still don't know what to make of that story, but I mean, it answers your question as to whether that amount of discipline and focus is translatable.
So the past 3 years, you and I have only communicated by email, not even directly, through Amy, basically. You sent your columns in through Amy. I sent the editing back to Amy. No idea. It's the first time we've met in 3 years. And what always astonished me is that, all right, this guy, there's a lot of prisoners who've made something of themselves inside, but the level of the quality of what you were writing, to me, was astonishing. I'd never seen that before, and I kept encouraging that. And I know, as I found out last night, you were an honors math student in middle school when you first met Amy, and then everything stopped. So I asked you, where did you learn to write like that? I mean, where did you get that to that point where I know there's prison libraries, there's everything else, and not every 14-year-old is going to be a Jeremiah Bourgeois, but what accounted for that? You told me an interesting story about how you explained that.
My writing started just trying to communicate my needs in a bureaucracy. Nothing is going to get done unless you write it. They have what's called kites in Washington, which is just basically the nickname for the written request you make to a staff member, whether, hey, I would like approval to take correspondence courses, or, hey, what's going on with my mail? I've been expecting this. And I would write kites, and a lot of times the responses wouldn't make sense to me, such as, hey, my door wasn't open for law library. Could you make sure I'm on the call out? And the response might be, in order to go to law library, you need to be on the call out. And for a long time, I thought it was that I just was not making myself clear enough. And so you start trying to distill everything into the most clear, concise, unambiguous language. And finally, when I got to that point and I'd get a response like that, I knew this has nothing to do with me. This is a game. This is a game. But, I mean, in order to do that, I mean, at the time, they had just gotten rid of most college programs in prison. So, and I spent so many of my early years in solitary confinement that there's no writing manual. So I would look at, like, books I'm reading to get sentence structure. Like, where do they use semicolons? And so you go through the page or two and you see a semicolon and you logic out, oh, I see why they would put it there. or an independent clause. You know, there was no instructor. It was like I was logicking out these things and then finding out when I finally had an opportunity to take distance learning courses, oh, there's a name for that. Oh, this is why they call it an independent clause. And so it was a strange way to learn how to write, and I can assure you I didn't know that I was an effective writer, and because there's...
But it worked, you were.
Yeah, it worked.
So I want to open this up for questions, but tell us quickly where you are now. I mean, you're going to take the LSATs this weekend, which is astonishing, but give us sort of a quick capsule odyssey of what happened. I mean, how you took your GEDs in prison.
So I got my GED in prison, but that was about the top of what you can get then. I left with my bachelor's degree through distance learning. You can pay for it. Now I'm taking the LSAT on Saturday. I'm working as a paralegal. Coincidentally, right before I got out, another prisoner, his attorney had just fired her legal assistant, and he brought my name up to her, and I got on the phone with her before I was released and had a job waiting. So I'm working. I intend to go to college. I'm still trying to write TCR columns in the midst of trying to adjust re-entry. And
you're actually doing some work in the same county where you were prosecuted, right, and convicted.
No, I'm right outside the county, but I've met with the prosecutor, that same office, and
They must be blown away.
If they are, they don't let you know. They have a good game face, but I think the fact that I was in that office meant that they must have been blown away because, just to be frank, my case is extremely serious. Any 14-year-old or 13-year-old that decision makers think should be locked up for 20-plus years had to have done something serious. And for them to actually want to meet with me in spite of the fact that I was confined for killing a witness that they had subpoenaed to testify. To meet with that man, despite the fact that he was a child or almost 30 years have passed, I think is a testament to reform and the fact that these particular decision makers recognize transformation.
Okay, so you can read the full story, much of the story, in an ebook that's just come out on Amazon. The link is on our site. And we'll have some copies of the book, I hope, tonight at our dinner. It's an extraordinary chronicle and ideas, perceptions about not only what life is like inside prison, but how someone inside sees what's going on outside of prison. But I want to, we have some time for a few questions, so open for that. Yes.
Yeah, so my name's Connor Sheets, a reporter in Alabama. And I spent several days with a guy right after he got out of a prison sentence of 20 years. And one thing he talked about, he was incarcerated as an adult. Like, I think he was 23 when he was incarcerated. And he said it made it, for him, a lot easier to live with his incarceration because he had these memories of being an adult. He was married, he had a child, that type of thing. And then he said the people that had it the hardest were people that went in as children. I just wanted to, you touched on that a little bit. I'd just be interested to hear, do you feel that? Do you think that that was something that impacted you? And then how do people cope with that? And it's just an interesting part of it.
So I don't know how I coped with it. I think I'm still coping with it because you don't have the memories accumulated to look back on. There's no, oh, I remember the time when I was at that party in high school, or when I got that first job, and it's compounded by the fact that I was a child, so you can't think of a girl you thought was cute and that you wished you had had some encounter with, and this is a 13 or 14-year-old you're talking about, and now you're a grown man. Everybody in your mind was a child. And so you have to sever off all of that, and I just wasn't one of those people that actually thought about what it would really be like out here, because it seemed like too much of a fantasy. And I just lived with the reality of, I'm in here, and what am I going to do here? And I didn't allow myself to think outside the bars that much.
Jeremiah, thank you for sharing your story. I didn't do nearly as much time as you did, but I understand the search for joy, and I would offer you the search for joy will not come from the interactions in society. The search from joy is going to come from your soul, my brother. So find the joy in your soul, man.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Thanks very much for sharing your story with us today. I wondered if you can talk a little bit about what we heard from Leanne about the changes going on in North Dakota and in other states, this effort to humanize and to treat people who are incarcerated with more dignity and respect. If you think that is, if you saw that yourself, and if you think that that's really reform.
I think it is reformative given the limitations. Trying to implement the type of transformations or the approach of a place like Norway or these Norwegian companies and think that it can be transplanted on American prison is just complete fantasy. But when Leanna spoke of trying to change the hiring practices and bring in an officer who isn't there because he wants to control or she wants to control, but actually sees their role as trying to further rehabilitation, I think that is the most important piece of what's going on there, because the line officer has the most interaction with a prisoner. And if you have been treated unjustly, whether right or wrong, it affects the way you deal with those officers and the way those officers deal with prisoners. And trying to change the makeup of the officer in a prison is a long-term project that the only people who will probably see the beginning of the end of it are the prisoners in that state who are serving life sentences.
You were incredibly biting in one of your columns that we have in the book about the relationship between prisoners and corrections officers. And you pointed out how a lot of prisoners try to figure they can suck up to corrections officers to get more privileges or whatever else. And your remedy, in a way, was to remain standoffish, to make sure that you stayed your own man and didn't go either, even if it seemed like you were antisocial or against them. Expand a little bit on that. I mean, how does a prisoner, serving a life term, deal with the only people he really knows except the family who visits him, this superimposed level of authority that he has to deal with, or she has to deal with all the time?
I was biting in that piece, and the piece related to the Washington Department of Corrections trying to put in place some of the practices that North Dakota has, from behavioral observations to just
yoga classes. I love that.
Yoga classes, yeah. They have yoga, they have the dog programs, and while she had talked about the resistance of line officers, I will readily admit that there's probably resistance from a subset of prisoners in there, because I can assure you it is quite difficult to convince someone like me that the Department of Corrections all of a sudden wants to look at them humanely and change their practices when most of your time in the system has been defined by negative encounters and authority and control. And so for me, when I hear all of a sudden you want to start calling me an individual, that was the word they wanted to use in Washington State, as opposed to offender. Not sir, not Mr., individual. For me, it was like lipsticks on a pig. Because ultimately, especially for somebody who's doing life, who has been most impacted by the changes that have been happening, and usually it was on a negative trajectory for the last 30 years, to call me an individual or as opposed to an offender, while at the same time I'm going to die in prison and my transformation is manifest, it's almost offensive. Like, why are you playing with me like right now? I'm going to die here for something I did as a kid or as a young man. I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70. I may have started rehabilitation programs. I've mentored other prisoners. I try to do positive things to the extent that I can, not only in here, but out there. And you tell me, will you stand for search, sir? At the end of the day, you have no liberty. At the end of the day, you get strip searched, and they tell you to bend over and spread your cheeks. And whether they call you sir or not through that process, you still have no liberty, and your reform and rehabilitation means nothing.
Okay, so we're going to have to unfortunately cut it there so we can get downstairs in time, all the blocked elevators, but please join me in thanking Jeremiah for sharing his story. And as I say, you can read much more of it if you download the e-link. Jeremiah will be with us today and tomorrow as well, so he's free to talk to you guys, whoever comes up to him. Again, thanks so much. Let's move on down. You can use either side of